All right, all right. So I hope you heard that blind Tom Wiggins. I really like that version of that song. Uh, Very incredible, sort of remembering and memory of this period, some of the important events, and particularly the Battle of Manassas in that piece, um, by a blind man, written and created, former slave. Interesting history and everything there. Um, So it's a nice way to get started looking at some elements of these two sections we're going to look at. One's going to be the Civil War, which is like the first lecture. Then the next one we'll look a little bit at some of the aftermath, particularly zeroing in on aspects of Reconstruction. So in this section, we want to look at a couple things. Maybe some of the things that bring us to sectionalism. Some stuff we'll just go through, kind of maybe not as with more, some detail here, and then we may look at it differently as we discuss in class. But use this as a resource to help you maybe understand and offer some context. But as I said, things like sectionalism and its origin, and then you have these sort of three kinds of factors that are boom. Once they go to, we're right into this. So we'll look at that. Zeroing in on sort of African American soldiers and their role in some key battles. That's another sort of important feature of this as well. So we'll look at some of those things as it relates to these events. All right. And I start as a sort of an interesting point because most folks wouldn't maybe look at the life of this guy, Bakwakwa, as a starting point to look at the Civil War, but I would. And why? Because one, this is what this is all about, right? Are these people who are captured from Africa and being brought into North America. The main reason for this fight has to do with the lives that are disrupted in the context of that, right? So the abolitionists thought that will, surge through folks like John Brown, who we'll talk about, Henry Thoreau, if you want. I mean, you can even go more deeper into the sort of Enlightenment tradition and talk about, other folks who have things to say about those things as well. Rousseau. So you can get in there if you want, but the crux of all that has to do with these people who deal with the process of the West seeking to make them a commodity, and it comes to a head in the American events of our Civil War, right? And by the way, of course, we're not the first as well, as you know, to end this horrible trade. The British, seek to abolish it in 1807. That's a whole nother conversation. But if you guys want to delve into some of that, we could a little bit. You'll see the British abolitionist movement and that sort of moral push play a role in the way they respond to the Civil War. We'll look at just a bit of that. But just this guy, Bakwakwa, right? For one, he's from the Hausa kingdoms, Jagal, ancient kingdoms. And why is he showing up and making a footprint in North America at this time? That's important, right? The other thing is he's all over this space, right? He's going to be in Ouida, which is, Hausa kings are in Nigeria. Ouida's in Benin, by the Benin, so it's a completely different place. So you go from a place that's very much about Islam, Sudanic, Muslim, Islamic practice in Africa to one that's about voodoo through by the Benin and Ouida is voodoo, right? So he has that sort of interesting thoroughfare. He'll end up there. He's going to be in Brazil for a while. He's in Port-au-Prince, Haiti, right after the Haitian Revolution, maybe about a generation or so, I should say. And in that context, he ends up working for a free black man from America who's working and has property in Haiti. And this is in the sort of early years, the good years of the Haitian Revolution that's beginning to create some, this is, again, that's reverberating into all of this, right? Because you talk about a revolution that will make the case for and fight for the rights of people to be, completely free. And other constitutions are doing that too, but that's one that's enacted by the slaves themselves. So Toussaint Louverture leads something very significant there in that context. But our guy's there. He's also in New York, and then in London, and then by all accounts he ends up back in Liberia. So he makes the full journey, right? All the way, and it happens in the midst of our period. So this is happening in the years 1850 or so, and then up through the end of the Civil War. You can see when this first published account of his experience comes out, right? So very interesting in that respect, right? You see, he speaks a number of languages. He attends New York Central College, right? And it's through some exposures to the emerging abolitionist movement that he becomes aware of, and sort of conscious of this big, sort of broader issue, right? And how it relates to his own experience, right? You say, well, no kidding, someone can see themselves in this, but I mean, there's a lot of complexities that come with this. And in addition to this, he comes from a tradition, though, the Lada Sudan and in West Central Africa is also has its own perception of what freedom means, right? And they've actually, some of the jihads associate the issue of enslaved and free Muslims into this conversation. So again, I mean, that just reminds us that the question of freedom and the conflict that it's creating is in no way exclusively an American phenomenon, right? And here we have someone who comes from a way distant land, distant culture, distant experience, pulled into this in the context of the wake of this of slave system that's on its knees by the time you get to the period that we talk about, right? And like so, like this life is depicted in so many interesting kinds of ways, right? Sometimes by people who have some connection to this real life, right? I mean, if you look there on the left, it's Solomon Northup and the moments where he's being forced to beat Patsy, right? And he has to do it, right? And then to the right here, we got Harriet Beecher Stowe's account of image, and these are both come from the early texts. Some of the lithographs and other pictures that are in these early versions. And then in this one is Simon Legree confronting this Uncle Tom, right? And he, Uncle Tom won't do it, so he kills Uncle Tom, if I'm not mistaken. And then there's that whole event. But these are two interesting narratives. Which of these is the most accurate or more evidential? I'm going to go with Simon Northup because he's the guy who experienced this and wrote this out. And while Harriet Beecher Stowe's writing is going to awaken a consciousness in America that had definitely been asleep, it does get people to sort of take this a bit more seriously. You see the counterpoints here, right? And it brings up some of these issues, right? That maybe we can unpack some in class about how people are resisting and in what ways they're resisting this type of thing. And then, how these sorts of features of a Black Atlantic, as with our guy, Aquaqua, and then issues of freedom and abolition, race and historicity, like who's telling the story of abolition and freedom, right? And then modernity, and even the sort of production of these narratives as part of the way that you tell the story of someone like a Aquaqua or Solomon Northup, for that matter, right? And then you get into some interesting stuff there too, because here again, you get to this sort of place where you got these two depictions of aspects of women, African American womanhood, maybe sort of in the place where it's the sort of wrestling of identities going on amidst the slave system, maybe that kind of thing, right? But look at the way they describe these two, and again, we can unpack this more. But like you got Patsy in Solomon Northup's account, right? Queen of the field, slim and straight. I mean, you can see some of these descriptors of this person, right? Guinea, brought over on Cuba on a station. And that's an interesting one because it does sort of make an African connection. And we'll unpack some of this maybe a little bit, further in class discussion, perhaps. But then look at Topsy. Very, very similar. I mean, similar but not, right? I mean, and it'll be interesting to see how you all read this when we talk about this some in class. Never was born, said Topsy. Never had no father, no mother, nor nothing. And even though Guinea and this sort of Guinea as a sort of problematic label, I mean, at the very least, you got a sort of something about an identity there that's at work. And this is interesting, I think. So these are the kinds of ways where you can start to tear and play with this. What do these two figures mean? How are they represented or depicted, if you will, right? This type of thing, right? I mean, we could go on and on here. And then hopefully, this is the kind of the spaces where some conversation can come, right? But maybe sort of where you come out on these two figures to some degree, or where you come out on what the issue of Aquaqua and the bringing of people into this America is doing, right? This is the sort of, as the sort of dividing line. If, I'm assuming you've been going up to this point talking about the now a beginning issue of abolition and starting to become aware and become politicized, right? And I say politicized because it isn't about Aquaqua so much as it is about how other people feel about Aquaqua, if you get my saying, right? and then almost in that way, I don't want to say completely nullified in sort of representation, but there's some of that going on. Thank goodness for Frederick Douglass or Hannah Craft's account of Bondswoman's narrative or Sojourner Truth to keep us on task. Harriet Tubman keep us on task, because otherwise you can get deluded by this sort of strange narrative, right, of peoples and identities and things, right? I mean, and look at the kinds of things Lincoln is saying, and we'll look at even this is Stephen Douglas, right, not Frederick Douglass, but we're going to look at how he and Frederick Douglass sort of get along too on issues such as this, right? And it kind of shows where Lincoln is with everything. I mean, for good or for bad, we should know. Yeah, he's going to sign the Emancipation Proclamation, but did Frederick Douglass have to work on him? I mean, you guys darn right he did. He had to do surgery to say, well, all right. I mean, there was some work involved. Don't believe the perception of things, right? And something like this quote reminds you of that. That the idea of equity between folks was never on the agenda for Lincoln. The purpose that he's really pushing for is the sustainability of the Union. Now he's going to turn the corner a bit better and see things somewhat differently. And this is why people got so frustrated with him, because he was talking, maybe as you say, out of both sides of your mouth. And what they were calling at the time, he was the compromise. Compromise wasn't a compliment there. And the way they were describing him as a great compromiser, that wasn't necessarily a compliment. It was more about this sort of milk toast. It was just, you couldn't take this aside, if you will, or perception and sort of stick to it, this kind of thing. And then ultimately he will sort of go in a direction of ending slavery, which people didn't want to let go, so this type of thing. But politically, what sectionalism means is that you have, even going from an earlier thing, you had the Missouri Compromise 1820, but this is a sort of furtherance of that, actually in the wake of the Tex-Mexican-American War, because as the end of the war comes, Texas, as a state, right? It's not there yet. It's going to be admitted as a state here, right? But part of the treaty of, I believe the Treaty of Ildefonso, maybe correct me on that, that will say where that the border goes, and it goes kind of straight, and it cuts right into a very nice a bunch of water, right, of all things. We could look at that up close. Maybe we'll do that in class. But that issue of where states are going to go, California a free state, Texas becomes a slave state, right? And then people start saying, look, this thing's going to go out. How's this going to play? And that fueled a lot of tension, political tension, somewhat, sure, right? And by that I mean I'm not sure how much people had real concern about the morality of of these people, of the actual lives of these captives, right? They become sort of props in these narratives. Yeah, people have vested financial interest in them, but that's as property. I'm talking about the personhood, right? So this kind of thing. And so this is the issue. I mean, as the country becomes and looks more and more divided, people are like, okay, you know what? I mean, this is not sustainable. This is not sustainable. And really, as you get towards the end, people, even Lincoln included in that, and other folks, as you get to the wake of the Civil War, people become more and more aware, okay, this is bad. This is bad for our consciousness of the American system, right? This kind of thing. This is bad for our morality. It didn't mean that they weren't willing to see Black people maltreated and not have the right to vote. I mean, literally, it becomes a federal law. But if you look at what the states do, you kind of are like, oh, only some states really made sure Black people could vote. Illinois wasn't one of them, right? Only some states, when someone came into their state and took people away as part of the fugitive slave law, like they did with Solomon Northup, you saw what New York did. They were nullified. They didn't send agents down there to go chase him down. Due to the appeal of others, and maybe some other abolitionists become aware of this, ultimately they're going to go with him, but he's gone for 12 years, right? So things like the what I call personal liberty laws. And for me, that means like stuff like what we'll look at the Illinois Black Slave Code some. I think that's in the next couple of slides here. That reminds us that even though states are not and being critical of fugitives, even in Boston, there's concern of this. But then on the other side, in the very same city, you got other folks who are saying, you know what? I mean, bye. Yeah, you can come get him. Let me show you where he is. He's right over here. So you have that mentality. Yeah, abolition is increasing, and operations in the Underground Railroad are becoming much more efficient and expert, right, in terms of moving people around, right. But as this is happening even more so, it's putting more teeth into what this again, what I call these sort of personal liberty laws, right? Because what they do is sort of say, you can come into our state, sure, but if you come in here and for one, if you're escaping slavery and someone's looking for you, you better be able to support yourself in this country. Otherwise, you can't be here, essentially. And literally, if you were, you could be put up for auction and used as labor. This happened frequently in the United States, even after the Civil War. So, I mean, what does that tell us about some things? I don't know. I mean, we'll look at the code. I got the link there, so we can maybe take a look at it if you want. But it sort of said, you can't be in the state, and it said that if you were there and you remained for more than 10 days, you were susceptible to being fined, right? And so this is bad stuff, right? And it doesn't. It's nowhere. It's just as bad as the fugitive slave laws, which gave people from southern states the rights to go up and grab and capture someone and then to bring them back down to that state, as you see happen, of course, with the account of Solomon North, it was 12 years a slave. But that's just one that was published and that we got to know about. I mean, there's so many instances of that. It's pretty disheartening when you start to think about it that way, right? We'll look at how these laws work because they're in a number of states, but Illinois, we'll look at Illinois up close. Our document does that. We're looking at African Americans in Illinois from 1840 to 1870. So when we look at that piece, you'll start seeing what this really looks like in the period up to the Civil War and then after its end, right? This kind of thing. But the issue of these laws, though, politically are going to play, right? Because politically, yeah, again, on the level of high morality, people will say it is wrong to enslave another person. But when it comes to competing for labor, that's a different conversation altogether, right? When it comes to other kinds of things, it's a completely different conversation, right? So, people would say, no, the fugitive slave law is wrong. It's wrong because also, too, we don't want somebody coming in out of another state and then practicing their own laws in our state. What right do they have to go and do that, right? Especially if they're a free state or they're a slave state and this is a free state, right? And so people, by the very issue of their political sort of sovereignty as a state, we're concerned about this as well. So that becomes a sort of point of contention, and you couple that with this issue of the issue of the slavery, right? And then that's perfect sort of segue into these courts. You have three major events, which you're going to see: Kansas-Nebraska Act, John Brown raid, and the Dred Scott decision. And two of them are very much involving one person. And this is why he's up here looking crazy like Paul Bunyan's daddy up here on the picture, right? Some of you may know who this is automatically, right? And in an idealized sort of image, this is the John Brown, right? Who, I don't know. I think sometimes we don't want to put all resistance and awareness of the mainstream, and by that I mean largely white culture, into the box of this sort of liberalist stuff, which for me is like, okay, it's the morality of slavery and then misrepresentation on the labor side, or it's acknowledging that, yeah, people shouldn't be tracked down as fugitives, but when you come into our state, if you don't have the money to do thus and so, we're still going to enslave you, right? Or it's the idea that this is your human brother who cannot be enslaved, but the social Darwinism and ideations of inferiority do things like the pseudoscience of phrenology and other things is green lighted, right? So for me, I can find that sort of milquetoast, sort of mainstream, halfway in the game, right? John Brown ain't that. I'm gonna just say it that way. Okay, John Brown's not that, right? For all you may think of what he does, he gets radical on this issue, and to the degree that he organizes and fights. It reminds me of, like, if you ever heard of the Weather Underground here in Chicago during the Black Panthers and during the 1960s when things were heating up, and the way those folks start responding, they start heating up. There's a whole backstory with that, right? And someone did have to do something a bit more radical to raise the mainstream consciousness of white America. I'm not talking about black people. I'm talking about white America. And John Brown did that. I mean, for whatever you may say about him, and a lot of folks had to recognize the truth of this. He's not alone. There, Thaddeus Stevens as a senator, even to, there are many. We may even talk about some of those voices, but our of course emphasis is on how this is impacting the lives of Black Americans. But extracting John Brown in a class about American history would be ideal, right? And this event that he's involved in is called Bleeding Kansas. And again, it's as the states are become as territories are becoming states, and this at the expense of these native folks who live here. Let's not leave that out of the conversation either. But as that begins to occur, and remind me, we'll talk about Black Hawk and the Sioux War, because that ends during this period to 1862, and we have to sort of make sure that we also mention that as well. And we'll talk about that some in class, because the events that's around the war itself are of real importance there, right? But as these places become territories, you're starting to eject native peoples off of these lands they have been there for millennia, right? As remember, they could the Buffalo and the Great Plains folk. This is Kansas. This Kansas and Nebraska. That's the Great Plains right there, right? These folks who have become adept on horses that have been come up through the Spanish, right? This is why you got the Mexican-American War and the end of that war playing a role in the borders of Texas and this kind of thing, right? So as it becomes a territory now to expand into and to build into, definitely on the fringes, right? This is the Old West, right? This is the West where, this is frontier territory. And by frontier, we mean you have to not completely subdue these local folks. And then the railways and all is maybe making a way out there, right? Just beginning, right? And so, this is dangerous stuff to be in this space, but a beginning of an established foothold that's going to be in this frontier space, right? And who's doing it? These rough sort of travelers, these land speculators who got big plans for what they're going to do. I'm opening a KC's Masterpiece Barbecue in 2023. No, I'm kidding, but people have plans. The city of KC, people were the city fathers, and some of these, you go back to who those people are. They come in the 18th and the 19th century. This is this period. If they're not, some people are come as later migrants too. But if people can trace their heritage back to early Kansas as Anglo Americans, they're part of those early city fathers and speculators, and those people come from all over the country, right? And they're looking like, I can move to Kansas, right? So like, for instance, Senator Atkinson and folks from just over the border there, Missouri, said, hey, you know what, we could get over here, right? And then you got this ideology called free soil, the free soil movement, which says that, basically it's we're not talking about Black folks coming to move here, right? This was saying, okay, we don't want slavery here, but we could settle, right? And so now the folks who want to bring slaves here to work them in Kansas versus those who want to be free soilers, and both of them, this is frontier territory. So you got to come out here, you got to know how to survive. So you best believe it, if they run into each other, and all you need is just a little bit of a spark. I mean, we all seen, the West. Most of these movies are cheesy, but I like them, I guess. But a lot of them, depict an era where, the gun was part of this culture too, to some degree, right? And so that meant, erupting violence. And basically, this is what Bleeding Kansas is in 1854, right? Between 1854 and 1856, right? People from different states fighting to who's going to have control over the territories here, who's going to determine whether this place is going to be land for free or land of enslaved, right? And really, it's almost to a sort of a stalemate, because it can't be necessarily resolved in this context. There are different ways that this ends, depending on which date you use between 1854 and 1856, right? But many people, again, will argue 5 or 6 years before the Battle of Fort Sumter, right? Another key, Dred Scott case, because it further polarized the language, the political ideology, et cetera, of the era, right? And this has to do with someone by the name of Dred Scott, right? Who was living in places. He's kind of on the fringe. He's moving in and around. Illinois digs down deep. It's right there in the heart of the South almost. I mean, it's pretty darn close there. right? And so yeah, people who could be sort of mobile. And remember, Missouri has only recently become a territory. So, you know, you have folks that maybe a generation prior or so may have been moving back and forth a little bit already, right? Mobility, right? So, you know, Dred Scott and his wife had been slaves in states, but slavery was declared illegal in those states. Illinois is one of those places, right? As part of the states of the Louisiana Purchase, right? So that doesn't necessarily mean Louisiana per se, because if you're in Louisiana, you know, there's a good probability that you know you might could get captured and put into some sort of slave system, and he's in and out. So this even suggests some mobility about the sort of work and life that this person has, and we'll look at some features of that, some in class there as well. But you know, ultimately, the case of what happens to him based on real concern on the part of abolitionists who are politicizing this issue, but also concerned about this issue of slavery. Here's the issue. This is what we're talking about. And then also those who are on the side who say, oh, absolutely not. Let's keep things the way they are. I foresee slavery all the way west. We want all this, as many states going west to be slave states as possible, right? And so ultimately, you see the ruling there, and it sort of says that slavery was could be property, right? I mean, could not deprive people of their property without due process of law, right? So there you have it, right? So that meant, boy, you got to go back, essentially, right? And you know, this is going to be very much I mean, this is like sort of like how will it play back, right? Well, on one hand, the folks who are very much so frustrated by this ruling say, okay, you know what? We're gonna vote our guy in now. Now, well, we may not have liked the compromise. We might have thought he was talking out of both sides of his mouth, but he has one issue politically that we agree with, and that's end this daggone slavery. So guess what? He got our vote, right? So boom, there you go. In 1860, he's going to get the nomination of the Republican Party, right? And then for the South, that was like, oh, that's the one. I mean, if you're going to allow this decision to, you know, I mean, if you're going to elect this president, you know, we're going to secede, and they did. December of 1860, South Carolina was gone from the country. Okay, and so you can imagine that that's going to be a predecessor to this war, right? A big one, right? And the third one is John Brown's raid, and there's that daggone John Brown once again, right, with his big beard, hugging the little kids, hugging the African American kid, hey, little baby, kissing kids and all that. But I'm telling you, the guy's heavy, man. You look at what he does right here. I mean, he's gonna arm. I mean, he does stuff in a way that Denmark Vesey, and he's inspired by these folks, Gabriel Prosser, Denmark Vesey, and Nat Turner. So he sees himself as holding up that sort of tradition of those three prior instances of Black revolution and rebellion in America that are 1, 2, 3 catalysts for the beginning of the end. Slavery's it's over. Is the beginning of the end of slavery with the Prosser Rebellion, right? Because it showed that what was happening in Haiti could happen here. And people just was like, you know what? And then Denmark Vesey too reminded that, you know what? And a generation later, here it is again. You know, Denmark Vesey, boom, we could do it. That's why they really made a point to really kill him. And it was the first time that Virginia actually heard someone say, listen, now they didn't respond until 1862, but they heard someone say, hey, you know what? Can we end slavery? For the first time, people wanted to hear it. And we'll look at that, and it's part of in our video cues that I've posted up, or that I will post up, that you could take a look at, right? But Brown sees himself in the wake of that, you know. So he liberates 11 slaves in Bleeding, Kansas. This is one of the trajectories for that incident, right? And then in 1859, he and I believe it's like 12 or 15 other folks raid a federal armory, right, at Harper's Ferry, Virginia, right? I mean, and their plan is for real. He's going to arm folks. He's going to do the thing that, you know, well, Nat Turner did it. But the thing that I think Denmark Vesey and Prosser were talking about doing, because if either one of those had got a hold of weapons and guns, you know, our conversation, you know, probably would have been somewhat different. And Weather stopped one, and then the other one, the news got out at the last minute. right? But Nat Turner, you see, was able to at least accomplish what it was that he sought out to do, in resistance to slavery, right? And then so here's John Brown, right? They end up catching him. I mean, they get surrounded, and then weapons are fired on him, and then ultimately the same forces who will fight against slavery, mind you, right, will capture him, try him, and execute him, along with these 12 other folks who are involved in this event, right? We'll look at this too. This is another clip piece that's in our one of our videos there, so you get to see how some of this is actually playing out and what's leading to some of these events here. But how do you know how to remember this guy? Yeah, definitely as a martyr, as a sort of, some people saw him as insane, literally, because he went in a place that no one else was going to, when it came to saying, okay, this is the end. If we do not eject ourselves from this horror, this scar, and start to repel this scar, meaning slavery, we are never going to be able to release ourselves from it, right? So how much of how crazy was he? I guess I'll leave it like that, right? I think it was one of those prophets that we wish we would have listened to, I suppose. I don't know. We've had so many of those kinds of changes. This is what all this history gets us to maybe sort of begin to think about, reflect on. Anyway, you see, I remember we mentioned 1860. So look at how it goes. I mean, look at this. I mean, we could find the same kinds of very clear polar lines in contemporary politics, right? Lincoln, how many states did Lincoln win in the South? And Breckenridge, Breckenridge, none in the North. This is the 1860. This further polarization, further sectionalism, right? It justifies South Carolina seceding from the Union. It was waiting for that anyway, right? As this quote by this historian says, right? The state was long waiting for an excuse to secede and unite the southern states against the anti-slavery foes. Upon confirming the results were final, South Carolina declared the Union now system between South Carolina and the states under the name United States of America is hereby dissolved. And this is from here is where we go, right? Into war, right? But again, I just want to sort of remind about one other little thing there, right? About one other little element of this, and that is just looking at Davis a little bit more up close. I mean, I know, again, this is Black American history, so why the hell are we talking about Jefferson Davis? Just a minute, you give me a minute here. He's in and around Wisconsin and Illinois, right? This is going to be the head of the Confederacy, right? You can see some of his history. I just present, who he is, just so you know who he is, and some of his story, and that he's on both sides. And this is my point. I think my point in showing this is to just remind of the entrenched levels of resistance to ending slavery in this country. People didn't want to let it go, right? I mean, that's a real important thing to sort of keep in your mind. I mean, it's not the same. It's nowhere near the same. But one sort of reference you might think about is something like oil, right? We are, look at what it's doing to the thing outside, right? I mean, the weather's getting stranger by the day. We know we're ejecting stuff into the atmosphere. We know it's not helping anything, but I'm sitting here talking to you, but what do I have to do? Well, actually, I don't have to today, but at another moment, I have to get in the car and drive down to meet you. So that's the same gas. And some of you say, well, I don't do that. Well, it's good if you don't, man. I mean, I know that takes real effort. And there are some who don't. I had friends back in the day, they would do everything they could to avoid it. But even if you get on a train, you use it. Even if you get in electricity, you're using it, right? Someone who I know, who's an oil insider for years, right? Taught these truths to me, right? So it's all up in everything. So the notion that, and then if someone said, "Oh, we gotta let it go," and you realize everything that will be lost, where are people gonna be, right? Because of the environment, right? Which seems off in the we keep on off in the distance, but it's coming to us. We coming to a head, man, right? but entrenched resistance. People, I don't care if you can be looking at it in front of your face and people don't want to hear it. I don't care, you know. And that's, I mean, it's not the same, but it might be a way to think about this, right? Because I mean, and even if you read some of this, we'll look at it more in class. I won't read it all right now. But you see, I mean, people use everything from biblical justification to the question of that slavery is the only means by which they have been civilized and elevated, and people agree with that, right? And other things, right? He says what have been the consequences of this agitation, meaning us as a union fighting, right? This is 2 years before. This is probably right. Dred Scott. I forget the year of the Dred Scott decision, right? But this is right in the wake of that, right? And what will he say, you know, about this evil? What he calls an evil is an agitation brought on by this issue of slavery, right? Not one particle of good has been done by any man of any color by this agitation. It has been insidiously working the purpose of sedition for the destruction of that union on which our hopes of the future greatness depend, right? Now, look where he is giving the speech. Now, Boston is, and yeah, it rightfully so. It becomes a bastion of sort of free Black culture and other kinds of things. So I don't want to sort of put such disparaging voices on that, but it just reminds us that you have an equal voice that was very much dissenting to that, right? As early in these early stages, who really thought that, you know, slavery was what needed to be in this country, right? And even though they would go and fight ultimately as part of their state and their family and other things and fight for this cause, many of them still, as we know, I mean, the issues bear that out as you look at the rest of this sort of history, right? And so the Confederacies formed from that. This just shows you some of it, and this sort of rhetoric of, you know, we're always talking about damn dominoes. If it ain't the Kennedys, dominoes in South Vietnam, Southeast Asia. There's a domino communism that's dot dot dot. Kennedy didn't say that, but some of the, I mean, he stopped saying it. Nixon. Who was it before him? They was all talking about that daggone domino theory of that was political economics or political science 101. Realist politic, you know, 101 kind of thing, man. But I always got a domino. This one is a domino of abolition. So we got to stop that domino from falling on these, you know, states. And so that was one of the features in the formation of the CSA between the years, as you can see, of 1861 and 1865. So what kinds of things are going to happen, right, in the subsequent years, right? How does this war play out in the wake of all these kinds of events, right? Well, you got the catalyst of Frederick Douglass and you know, Lincoln and their debates and dialogue, and this is definitely a clip we'll deal with some in class, and you know, I have there's a hyperlink attached there that we'll unpack and look at some as we investigate this further, but I mean, we know what it does. It's a pretty huge event, you know. It's kind of momentous there, you know. And there's a cool account of it, right? By a very famous writer, if you know, of Lerone Bennett Jr. He's very famous. He's written so much. He was a editor of the Jet, editor of Ebony. He wrote a book called Before the Mayflower, and that's what I'm reading from. He said there's never been anything been quite like it. Talking about 1860, January 1863, right? Right when the Emancipation Proclamation comes in, right? Because it will be, you know, I always say 1862, I guess, to give it more depth to it, but because it's made December 31st of that day, that year, right? It goes into effect. So, but maybe I need to stop saying 1862 and just say, go ahead and say 1863, 1864, because I guess that's what it is. But no, I mean, the decision is 1862, isn't it? All right. Anyways, but look at what they say. There's never been anything quite like it. A slave population rising up and leaving its ancient bondage. And literally, the thing comes on the wire. Because even at a certain point at that night, and this is what Lerone Bennett describes, you know, they began to give up. People are like, you know what? It's 8 o'clock in the evening, 9:30, 10, and still nobody was saying nothing. There was no word on the wire. And then finally, right about almost as it's 12, right before 12, it drops. It's coming. It's on the wires. And then that's the one that says, okay, all these people are free. It's the Emancipation Proclamation, right? But they try to keep it because the wires will get out. And you know, people know how to listen to stuff. right? And it's very interesting that people went out their way to make sure the slaves couldn't hear the wires, which means that they probably could had a way. I mean, ain't no telling how people might have been able to tap into the teletype and telegraph, as what it was at that time, and decipher that. I mean, why are we such a concern? But this is what he writes. Bennett writes. Slave population rising up and leaving its ancient bondage, forsaking its local traditions and all the associations and attractions of the old plantation life, coming garbed in rags or in silks, with feet shod or bleeding, individually or in families or larger group. Eating settles like the oncoming of cities. The slave said it in a song. No more peck of corn for me. No more peck of corn for me. Many thousands gone. No more drivers lash for me. No more drivers lash for me. Many thousands gone. Many thousands gone. Many thousands gone. Many thousands gone. That's the one. You know, it's the energy of that what's happening. And then, you know, if you think about what will come from that, right, it's quite significant, right? And we downplay it in our sort of historical memory of this period. We still write it as this sort of struggle piece, but Bennett reminds us, I mean, in the 60s, he reminds us, I mean, and that's a very turbulent space to remind people of this the jubilant years, right? He calls them the jubilant year. 1863 is a jubilant year, right? Because a couple of things happened in 1863, right? Well, one is the Louisiana Native Guard. Now, check this out, because it's very interesting here. What's happening here? Louisiana Native Guard, 1861, 33 black officers, 731 enlisted men, right? Listen to this. We, the undersigned, native of Louisiana, who has unanimously adopted the following resolution: the populations, to which, I can't see what this stupid thing anyway, we belong, will be ready to take arm and form themselves in the companies for the defense of their homes, city against any enemy who may come to disturb its tranquility, right? Now, is slavery here? The answer is yes. Are some of these folks slave owners? The answer is again yes, right? How did the Confederacy respond to these black troops, right? These black troops were ready to join, right? Well, they for a bit, they're going to use them, right? As sort of as labor and exploitive stuff. But as joining as officers to take up arms, they were like, nope. Even if you're going to defend slavery, nope. And some of them had real legitimate claim to do so, to make the claim on that, right? And so you can see the date there, right? They declare 12 days after the beginning of the war, which is April 12th, Fort Sumter, right? That they are going to fight on the side of the Confederacy. And the Confederacy wingles it away and says they're not really interested in that, as you could about imagine, at least as officers, right? And then, you know, again, I mean, this is in the wake of Fort Sumter, which is attacked, this massive attack, which is interesting because people in Charleston could sit and watch the thing happen. And, you know, they were sitting down drinking and having picnics while this battle's going on, because you had this perfect sort of straight line shot to watch things occur, right? So why do I bring this up, right? Because these guys are going to do something. I mean, this is an amazing kind of thing which happens here, right? And again, to admit that blacks actually fought for a cause which in the minds of the 20th century now stands exclusively for slavery and oppression is unacceptable to many concerned with the politics and maybe not the historical record, right? That's this guy, Ed Smith from American University, right? But then look at this. General Cobb of the Confederacy to James Seaton in 1865, right? Who is urging the government, the Confederate government, to reject General Robert E. Lee's idea of enlisting African Americans into Confederacy, because he thought it was a good idea. And he said, but the way he responds is, if slaves make good soldiers, our whole theory of slavery is wrong. So even there, in those moments, it was aware, right? And like, if you've seen this or you Google this, most of you catch this one, because it just shows that Louisiana Native Guard. And then you kind of say, oh, here these folks are. But actually what that is, it's not the 1861 Guard, because the 1861 Guard did not have white officers. This is the 1862 or 1863, if I'm not mistaken, right? That there is when the picture's actually taken, right? And it's when they're actually going to fight for the Union, right? They're actually getting ready to fight for the Union, right? And it's interesting. I mean, because, you know, both sides are going to first treat them pretty crap, like crap, man. Let's just be honest, right? And one of the reasons the Confederates hate the black soldiers is because some of those guys come from the high-end, wealthy, the Louisiana Native Guard. Some of those families, their dad had been, someone very important in France, and had come to settle in Louisiana when it was French territory, or some connection to Spain, and had married sometimes a free black woman. So these are people who were maybe several centuries out of slavery and had real power. I mean, these guys were they'll become the key sort of players when we start to talk about Reconstruction, right? So the idea here was that's why people was part of why they didn't like them, because they were doing good. You gave them nothing, and they were showing them like, look, man, right? They rebuffed the black officers, right? They said that no white man could ever salute these black officers. In my instances, on the Union side and the Confederate side, that's why I'm putting them both together here. I want to make sure that we're clear about this way this is sort of playing out, and in and outside of the rhetoric, right? So they get, and most of the guys get treated very, 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 very poorly, but in quiet. Both sides will acknowledge cultural sophistication, military intelligence, bravery of both the officers and the troops, right? And two events show us that: the Port Hudson campaign, which is I mean, it's almost a suicide. It is a suicide mission led by Andre Calais, who is an example of one of these well-to-do soldiers who comes from a background of a very wealthy family, and he's riding in, but he leads several charges. But the thing was, they're going to Port Hudson. Port Hudson was key. You had to get Port Hudson, right, to get Vicksburg. So it was big. Vicksburg was control of the Mississippi. This is a pivotal battle in the Civil War. So goes Vicksburg, so goes the war. And black folks are involved in both aspects, right? Both of them see black people used almost as sort of as fodder in many ways. But also, too, what's being tested is and being proven to folks. They already knew it, and they tried to make it seem like, that there was there weren't any black officers fighting in the before the Civil War. Get the hell out of here, man. Are you kidding me? In the colonial wars, for all the people who come and fight, conquistadors come with African conquistadors come when the Spanish first come here. So what are you talking about? I mean, it's just laughable. And they knew how to read some of that stuff too. It was there. They just didn't want to hear it because they wanted to keep people as property. I'm sorry, right? And the idea of letting that property go. Remember our oil. So before you get too judgmental, maybe that's for me. Remember that oil, right? Remember that. In both of those instances, man, those guys come out and they basically are giving their lives away because they get in horses and go down a 600-yard sort of dash, and all the sides all around Port Hudson are people where they can sit up on with guns and cannons and take shots, and that's what they do. And it happened several times. But even after those, like several of those charges, which most people after that, they go and leave. Caillou gets killed, they leave him on the battlefield. They won't even, the Confederates are so bogus, they won't even let them go out and pull up their soldiers. And that had been sort of the thing people would do after the battle. At least you get your guys off the ground. They kept pop. Every time you come out there, they sniping people to let them know, we want them out there to lay out here in the sun, to cook, as the rest of all these people out here are doing, right? To lay witness to what we were able to do, right? But the truth is, then some of the soldiers will pull back, hide back in the bushes, and continue to fight, right? So they continue on. And this is at a time when most of the troops would have retreated. The other Union commanders, if they weren't black, would have pulled those troops out of there after the first charge. But these guys went for down, I think 5 or 6, if I'm not mistaken. Right? And they're right in the midst of it, and they stay in. And ultimately what happens is that the Vicksburg wins. Grant captures Vicksburg. Grant, yes. And when he does, that's the end, right? So now Port Hudson doesn't mean anything, right? But before you say, well, this is just the Battle of Milliken's Bend's another sort of key event, right? And that's 1860, and that's Battle of Vicksburg. That's in the midst of the Battle of Vicksburg, right? So goes, and here again, you have black soldiers who play a pivotal role here, right? They play a pivotal role, right? They fight against the Texas Brigade. At one point, they don't have many weapons. They're out of weapons. They're outmanned. And here come the Texas Brigade all lined up. They shooting and tearing them up. And somehow they get caught in a spot where it gets hand to hand. And that didn't happen too often during the Civil War, but it did happen. So here they go. Boom. They're going at it. They're going at it, hand to hand combat. And I mean, it must have been a spectacle to see. But as you could imagine, the black soldiers held their own. Right, and then the Union warships finally show up to provide the support that was coming. It just was bogged down for whatever reason, and then this further assists these black soldiers of what's called the African Brigade to fight off and to defeat or to send the Confederates running. Right, that's a key moment in the Battle of Vicksburg. And then actually the thing is they don't pursue Lee. Right, they don't pursue Lee. Right, but other issues just around this a little bit is like that. Well, signals this. I mean, because even with these battles coming, the politics. How does this look to the wider world, right? And so there's a one moment there where it's called the Trinity Affair, right? They had to catch two Confederate diplomats, James Mason and John Seidel, who were trying to go to Europe to try to get Europe to get on the side of the Southern or the CSA. What can we do to get you guys on our good side, right? And then they make fun here, as you can see in the image, of the prime minister at the time, and like he's serving him up this pretty much this powder keg of cotton, which Britain wanted for their textile industry, right, and would have taken. But it's dangerous. How could you take it at the same time you said you were ending and abolishing slavery? The moral outrage and other things would be significant, right? And more the language of civilized nations versus uncivilized is coming into play. And the idea that a nation could be civilized and have slaves didn't make sense. Now we can colonize. Not when we can colonize, not when you can operate in a different level of coercion. Right. And that's not to say that's ultimately on the minds of all these folks, but certainly the effort to sort of evangelize and make this case for this kind of thing, it will grow out of an abolitionist movement, but it has its own flaws, as you can sort of see suggested here in the image, right? And then El Cinco de Mayo, I mentioned there that, just a couple decades prior, the Mexican-American War. But this has to do with, once again, in the French sending forces thinking they're going to capture money that was owed them by the I believe the British, but from Mexico, right? I believe I'm describing that correctly, right? Because Benito Suarez made agreements with the British and the Spanish to sort of say, okay, to stave off payment. Okay, so let me say it correct, right? But France stays, so it's actually Juarez needing to pay. All money is due from all three of those people, and the French say, nah, we're not going to take the deal. We're going to stay till you pay, right? And that's because they had their own sort of sort of aims in there as well, right? But it is this idea of sort of French colonial expansion. Remember, they sort of lost out on a lot of this, right? So this is them maybe showing back up some generations later, end of Napoleonic era, New France. France has abolished slavery too, although they took it back on for a few more decades after the Napoleonic Wars. So now they're back on, maybe sort of looking in sort of this sort of expansionist ideation, right? They lost Haiti too. So this kind of thing, right? There's Lincoln there providing support, right, against the French-backed forces and the French, right? And so this is a significant event, right? And it also gets very, very interesting there as well in terms of the way Mexico will see itself vis-a-vis the Confederacy. This is in part why I'm bringing this up, right? Because the issues of slavery are playing out even in Mexico here, as we see, right? And many people thought that they could convince these governors or these, I believe the term might be encomenderos, to sort of take up slavery and provide protection to the Confederacy so it could rebuild its strength and this type of thing, right? So there's that old sort of subtext there, all involved there, right? And we got, 54th Massachusetts, right? And what they do in July 6th. So this is why, again, Lerone and others call this the Jubilee years because of all this stuff. Look at what happens, right? Um, Emancipation Proclamation, blacks involved in fighting, right? And three major battles, Port Hudson, Milliken's Bend, and then here at the 54th Massachusetts here, right? In this moment, which gets sort of symbolized, embodied in the film and things. And the film is a great piece. I've seen it before, it's old and all this kind of thing, but it does sort of overemphasize these folks at the expense of, I think Louisiana Native Guard, for me, is the story, right? Because these are the folks who are on both sides of this. And these guys have to make a decision, and they do, to switch sides at a point where neither side really respecting their rights as citizens, but they at least can see the potential of citizenship and the people who are at least saying we want to end slavery, that their work signals others to join. And so by the time you get to July of 1863, the word is out. And by putting freedom at the forefront of this and saying that we're going to fight for whether or not we're going to maintain the Emancipation Proclamation meant, okay, now people are going to start picking up arms. And African Americans turned the tide of the war, as many people know, right? This kind of thing. But Lincoln leaves this legacy. He leaves this legacy here, right? He leaves a very problematic one, right? With this sort of total war. And many people view this as, the lost cause. This is closely connected with the lost cause and sort of the horror of Lincoln's assault on the South. And many people, war is hell. I mean, as you can imagine. I mean, it sounds kind of, colloquial or whatever, flippant, because everybody says that, and some of you folks may have served. Some of you may know people who have served, this type of thing. So that there's realness to that. I have family relatives who had served, and even my brother's son was over there in the Ukraine, so they thought he was going to have to go. Americans didn't go; they were on a warship, but he was on that warship, and my brother was all up concerned about that. But I mean, it's serious, and I mean, and even to that, folks, uncles and things in Vietnam and other things, man, who got could tell some way out stories to you, and got all kind of leftover problems and legacies in their lives and different things. So I'm not trying to make fun or make light of anything by sort of using that sort of terminology. It's just the wake of it. Even a righteous war, right? It's a righteous war to end slavery, right? I mean, it is a righteous war to end slavery. But in the wake of that, I mean, men, women, and children are gonna die who are non-combatants on all sides, right? And you can call that whatever you want. And yeah, I agree with the system needing to be destroyed to the core. Slavery needed to be destroyed, right? But in the wake of that, is real horror, real violence, right? It's real. I mean, war does that, right? Liberation wars and colonialist states where people are pushing off the European or kicking them out. They become horrible things. They're horrible. People lose their lives in these protracted battles, this kind of thing. So this will have that legacy, even though this is a war to end slavery. Right. So we'll look maybe some at that too, if this is a subject that comes out. And this one is sort of where we sort of wrap up some. I mean, we got is an important one there is really a Special Field Order 15, right, which is going to create Sherman's moving, and as he goes, he needs places to sort of release some of these captives, right? Or I'm sorry, I'm calling them captives, people who join up with the ranks of the army because they're free with the Emancipation Proclamation. We'll deal with this in more detail when we do Reconstruction, because then you begin to see how people begin to think about how can we use these abandoned lands, right? And Special Field Order 15, yeah, there was a conversation of 40 acres and a mule, as you'll see when we look at this convening by Sherman of Black ministers from throughout the South to decide what should we do next. Right, so that comes out in that story, right? So we'll see it more. But the Appomattox campaign is the subduing of Lee, right? And they kind of had him at Vicksburg, but they let him go. There's a couple of times where he just outfoxed him. He was the guy. This was the one. So he was outfoxing everybody. But in the end, for good or for bad, right? And you think about, again, the legacies of this. Grant allowing the Confederate soldiers to have rations and also to allow them to surrender without a conviction of treason, right? How's that going to play into Reconstruction? We'll talk about Reconstruction, right? And then with the anger over those events in April of 1865, the assassination of Lincoln, right, as that seminal event, right? So that's quite a bit to digest, I'm sure. But what we'll look at next is Reconstruction. And again, some of the broader themes in here that we've noted, we'll take time to unpack those a little bit further as we discuss them in class. So thanks for listening, and see you soon.